Rock and roll. Okay, everybody. So, last week we left off talking about the demigods and how it is not an unscientific, unreasonable, irrational, illogical principle to consider what is a living entity and what is a non-living entity, what is inanimate and what is animate, and considering the symptoms. You okay with that?
Yeah.
Sorry for
I was working with this feet. You maybe wash your hands after the class, man.
No problem. We have, at least, I don't know if it's still in high schools and schools, the way that I was raised, when we were talking about like history, old history, not like 100 years ago. It kind of went like Iron Age, Bronze Age, Stone Age. Is that the right order? It's the other way around. Bronze Age, Iron Age, Stone Age. Is that right? It's definitely Stone Age is last, so it's one of the...
There was a lot of noise going on here. The neighbors are complaining.
Sorry about that. All right, well, sir. And I remember, like in the high school textbooks, there'd be like a picture of this guy, like a Neanderthal, very hairy, sort of half gorilla, kind of looking with a spear, and there'd be a woolly mammoth or a saber-toothed tiger, big thing, and you get this kind of impression that 4, 5, 6,000 years ago, you get very kind of grunting, kind of create the wheel, maybe make a stone circle, or figure out how fire works, and you got these kind of little hunting, gathering groups sort of wandering around. That was what I was taught, and I don't know if they still teach like that. And especially since we've come out of the Dark Ages in Western culture. Dark Ages was a term given by the Renaissance people. Renaissance means like 400 or 500 years ago, like Christopher Columbus, that's Renaissance time. You've got a situation where you had a high culture. Do you know what that was? Like Greco-Roman culture, Socrates, Aristotle, Pythagoras, Homer. You've got democracy, for whatever it was worth, with slavery at the same time. But you've got some culture. You've got the Pantheon. You've got great pyramids. You have huge civilizations. You have war machines. You have medicine. You have the science of governance. You have all sorts of things going on. And then that comes down into the Middle Ages, or otherwise called the Dark Ages, when all of that in Western culture was actually lost. And then coming out of that again, you've got the Renaissance. So the Middle Ages are the idea is that it's the middle between two high cultures, when everything was civilized and nice and all that, and the place between is the Middle Ages. And the Renaissance people called those the Dark Ages. Almost 100% illiteracy in the Western world. A lot of what we would call sort of barbaric things, a lot of poverty, huge amounts of disease, the Black Death, all this kind of stuff. And a very poisonous, murderous kind of religious culture where anything other than a sectarian religious view held in Europe, which happened to be Christianity, for all its virtues and glories. But anything outside of that was considered barbaric, and you could kill those people, you could do anything to those people. It was, so many books were burned, everything, the whole Greco-Roman culture was lost. So the ability to make great architecture, except for a few cathedrals, was lost. All sorts of science, all literature, like the library in Alexandria being burned, maybe 1,500 years ago or so, or a little more. So from the Renaissance time, you get this feeling that we're coming out, we're going up, everything is evolving, we're better than we've ever been before. 2 nights ago I was watching the UFC. Anybody know what that is?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Mixed martial arts. Anyway, they were talking about this gentleman. He's the greatest fighter the world has ever known. He's the greatest fighter in history. What do they know about history? Really? You know, this little tiny snippet of time. What do we even know about, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago? We don't know them. There was until the Industrial Revolution, there was an average, so they say, It's in that documentary by, who was the vice president to Bush the first time?
Al Gore.
Yeah. What's that thing called? The Inconvenient Truth. Yeah, he says there was about 2.1 billion people on the earth before the Industrial Revolution, consistently, and he goes back to the time of Jesus. So you got 2 billion people living at any one time. Say the average lifespan is 60 or 70 or 80 years. So that's billions, hundreds of billions of people over thousands and thousands of years. But I saw gridiron, American football. When they win the Super Bowl, they say they're the world champions. But only one country plays that sport. Maybe two. Canada has some people there. But this kind of provincial, small-minded, you're wrapped up in this tiny little bit of time and space. And the greatest fighter in the universe, we even call her, the most pretty girl is Miss Universe, right? They don't know what's going on other planets. They have this little speck of dust, actually. Like when you see those images, like on Carl Sagan thing, of the galaxy, you can't even see the Earth. You can barely see our sun. It's like a tiny little thing, and here's this little speck of dust, and we're all tiny little specks of dust on that speck of dust. Miss Universe. Maybe not. And who knows, even on this planet, what was there 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years, 100,000? Who knows? So what I'm going to attempt to do today is, just like last Wednesday, we're going to try and break out of a little bit of the assumptions that we hold deeply. That every person that we've met, every teacher that we had at school, every book we've read, every TV show, has accepted a truth, which if we can stand back from it, may not be true. If we can step out of our century and see the broader picture, step out of our culture, step out of our race, step out of our gender, step out of this whole thing that we've been bombarded with for the last 20, 30, 40 years, or 19 years, then we will give ourselves the opportunity to broaden, to get a greater picture. In the old world, even up until 200 or 300 years ago, the main attempt of education was to do something like that. So people would study old languages, Latin, Greek primarily in the Western world, and Sanskrit in the East. And they would read the classics, Socrates, Homer, for us, going back now, perhaps Shakespeare or Wordsworth, or who knows, like this. By taking different people at different times and different cultures over vast periods of time and reading or understanding the best of their knowledge, one gets a broader view. One expands one's mind. So we're going to make some little attempt at that today. So, when we look scientifically, what is a living body, what is an animate object, and what is an inanimate object? Like this tile is inanimate, has no signs of life. From the Vedic perspective, and sometimes in those quantum physics kind of, where Zen meets physics kind of ideas, they suggest that atoms themselves are unconscious living entities, little sparks of consciousness. But leaving aside that whole thing, just letting that ride for now, in a very practical way, in a very real, pragmatic, scientific way, that tambourine does not show signs of life. This drum, that, what is that, plastic, or that wire, or these tiles, these are inanimate. They show no symptoms. Whereas we look at Vincent's foot, or Vincent's body, there is the rhythms of life there, the heartbeat, the blood flow, the breathing, the cells, these signs of a conscious living entity are there. Now, if, God forbid, Vincent passes away, hopefully in a long time, as soon as he leaves that body, as soon as the soul leaves, boom, no signs of life. There may be bacteria and other creatures in there who then have a happy day. But in terms of that soul, Vincent, he's gone somewhere else. When we study what is a living creature and what is an inanimate object, There are symptoms there. There is science there. You can look at a horse or a tree. A tree also breathes. A tree also has some circulatory, factor, drawing nutrients and all this stuff. There's life there. And like that study that Rohan was telling us about with plants, if you test very minute sound and electromagnetic fields and things, you can see that they're reacting to their environment. I think you said that a man came in and he tore up a whole bunch of plants, and then he left. And then other people came into that room and the other plants did not react. But when later that man came back into the room, or even came close, the plants all reacted like crazy on the electromagnetic, in their symptoms of electricity and magnetism and so on. There's life there. There's intelligence there. Like some ant will walk along, you put your finger in the way, he goes around. Or, you put the shower on and there's some ant, they try to get away from the water. Or I had a spider like this, which some of you saw, living in my house, and I would see how he would hunt. See, he would hunt. You see signs of intelligence, you see the rhythms of life, you see symptoms of life. Now the question is, because practically every single culture that we know of in the ancient world believed that the earth, the sun, the fire, the wind, the moon, that they were living entities. So the question for us is, let's take the one that we're most familiar with. When we look at the earth, does she show signs of life? Isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not a primitive idea. The demigods, or respecting these great deities, these devas, it's not primitive, it's not unscientific. It's actually very reasonable. You can believe it or not believe it, that's our right. That's our right with our best intelligence. But still, you could not argue that it's irrational, or it's primitive, or that's for Stone Age crazy people who they heard the thunder in the sky and they got scared and they wanted to put some personality there so that they could get some control by propitiating, by offering some sacrifice, and therefore they could protect themselves from the scary natural world. I've never read that. I've never seen any evidence for that in the ancient cultures of the world. Rather, you see very intelligent people, very capable people, very wise people, very thoughtful people, for the most part. Okay, so this is an example of the consciousness of the old world. Now, when you think of the earth as, what do the Celtic people say? Gaia. Is that right? Gaia? I think that's right. Gaia, or in Sanskrit they say Bhumi. Mother Earth, Mother Bhumi. Chamama. Pachamama. Where's that from?
Oh.
From Peru. Okay, so that's the traditional language of Peru. Is that right? Chile. Okay. My Peruvian friends, they also speak that same language. I guess they're right next to each other. When we actually think of the earth as our mother, would that positively or negatively affect our experience of life? Would not life then become somewhat enchanted? Would not then practically all the problems of green and environmentalism and protecting the earth and taking care of her and not abusing her, exploiting her, would not it solve those problems? From the very heart of the problem, from our consciousness, from the very foundation of the problem. Because even a rascal generally treats his mother okay, isn't it? You gotta get pretty low if you're gonna start messing with your own mom. Even in jail, right? You can sort of do anything to those guys, but if you say your mother or something, then they try to kill you or whatever. Have some sense of love there. Mom is mom. So, if we make a little experiment, and as we walk on the earth, as we deal in the garden, as we go about our life, we actually start to feel that oneness. Here is our mother. After all, just like we came out of the womb of our birth mother, our human mother, we also, in a sense, are made from the very Mother Earth, isn't it? We have multiple mothers. So like this, it starts to create a consciousness of being one with Mother Nature, being more, less divorced, less disconnected from the natural world, from the universe, from the sun and the moon and the rain and the stars, and we start to feel that. My friend Danielle Unwin, I don't know if she still is, but she was the head doctor in the emergency ward in Westmead, which is the biggest hospital in the Southern Hemisphere, I believe. And I have another friend, a friend of my brother's, who's a policeman, and they were telling me, not realizing the ramifications of what they were saying, that if it's a full moon, and it's a Friday or Saturday night, you actually have to put more staff on, isn't it? Yeah. And I think sensitive people even feel it. I certainly feel it. When the full moon is there, and especially, they were telling me on Friday, Saturday nights, because one of them works at the emergency ward. You know, if you hurt yourself, you go to the emergency ward. And another one is a police officer. And their actual position is they put extra security, extra police, extra nurses on, extra doctors on when it's a full moon, weekend night. Not realizing that that's astrology. That is the powerful effects of these heavenly bodies and how they are affecting us, how they are subtly affecting our minds, our bodies, our psychology, like that. If the moon is affecting us, is the sun not affecting us? Are some of these stars not affecting us? Is Venus, is Mercury, is Jupiter not affecting us? The moon may be so powerful and so obvious that even an insensitive person can perceive. But these other planets, these other stars are there. They are creating some effect. So,
can I say something about the moon?
You can.
I've been doing yoga for quite a while, and my yoga teacher said that sometimes when, depending on how the moon is, and particularly when it's full, you can feel like you're not in balance, or you can't do certain things that you normally are capable of, because everyone knows that the moon controls the ocean, right? The waves, the tides. Well, the human body is made out of 70% of water, so the same way the moon controls the tide in our body. So it makes sense. It made sense to me when he said that if it's a full moon, you might feel like you have no balance, when yesterday you were fine, you know? So
Like that. Like that. So very nice. So, we are going to look now, just like we were trying to step back and look a little scientifically, what is a living body, what is a dead body, and then reassessing Mother Earth. Is she alive? Is there a person in there? Just like Vincent's in this body. Is there some goddess, some Devi living in the earth? Now we're going to look at some other things of the ancient world. Let's look at architecture. Now I was watching a documentary recently, we have pyramids not only in Egypt, we have them all over the earth. In fact, I believe the biggest pyramid is not in or anywhere near Egypt, it's in Mexico. All through South America, especially in Bolivia, there's a lot of these old ruins. All through China, there's pyramids. Even in like England and things like that. Is it still functional? Cool. There's these famous things that we know of, like Stonehenge, and there's many more that we don't know of. I was reading a history recently of when the white people were coming into North America, at least from England, you know, and there's histories that white people also from Northern Europe had come into the Americas in previous times, but in any case, where they were writing straight out that they were finding these huge stone buildings with geometric shapes and all these different things. We don't know about that. We think of the American Indians as like teepees and wigwams and, what was it? Like that, right? But they were saying they were finding those. They were also finding large stone structures. What did they do? They dismantled them because it was free, easy stone. And they built their own buildings out of them. But a couple of, sort of wary people, highly conscious people, made different records of it, the geometrics, the weight, the different things like that, how they were aligned with the seasons, with the stars, all this kind of stuff. Like there was that famous Mayan calendar made of pure gold, and the conquistadors came in, and when they got it, what did they do? They melted it down for ingots and became rich. Anyway, so many things. So you actually have pyramids all over the earth. You cannot date a pyramid. Carbon dating must be done with organic matter. So you cannot carbon date stone. But if somebody, say in a pyramid, if you find a mummy in there, you can date that. Or some cloth, or some grain, or something like that. Something organic, you can carbon date it. So therefore they have some ideas of some of these structures. 4,000 years old, 5,000 years old, 6,000 years old, 7,000 years old. What I was taught in high school was back at that time, you got these hairy Neanderthal people with spears living in very simple hunting-gathering situations. But in this documentary, they were saying actually, in many ways, we do not have the technological capability now to build the pyramids. In many ways. For example, many of the stones in Egypt, they are 5-ton, 10-ton, 20-ton, 30-ton, 40-ton pieces of stone with many, they're not just squares, they've got grooves and cutouts in them like a puzzle, so that when they fit in, they're tight, and you cannot fit a razor blade anywhere between them. So they fit in tight, and they've got, like the way we do this work, you see this wood is cut out and then the shelf fits into it. Things like that are there. So you're dealing with 40-ton, 50-ton pieces of stone, 70-ton pieces of stone. There's one, I can't remember if it was in the Sphinx or near the Sphinx, that weighs over 200-ton.
It's an obelisk.
How did they move that? How did they shape that? How do they get it so tight that it fits together with no space?
Yeah, because I heard just about this thing, because I was reading about just this thing, and I was really interested in why is it that, and this one guy who I saw, he did a research on how did they actually do this, and they only had copper back in the day. There was only metal that they had, so they couldn't have done it with any iron or anything else. So what they did was taking the copper and then had sand. So the sand and the copper was the saw. So the sand was cutting the stone. That was kind of, instead of spraying water on a hot drill, it was spraying sand on a saw.
Whatever exactly is the technology, and perhaps that is it, the copper and sand, somehow or other, the effect was something that we would really struggle to copy today. Do you remember 9/11? Everybody, I guess, remembers 9/11. I remember seeing just after that, there was this, what do you call this guy? Engineer, and he was being interviewed. And he was saying, well, almost all the large structures of the 20th century, the 1900s, including the Twin Towers, almost all of them are made from reinforced cement. How long does that last? 150 years, he said. Lasts about 150 years and it keeps its structural integrity, and then it breaks down. So all these buildings that we've built, they're not going to be here. They're not going to be here in 5,000 years. And then consider it aesthetically. The pyramid, say that great pyramid of Giza, the big one, you see the three, it's that famous photo from Egypt, and the big one in the middle. That is now stepped, these big steps going up. But that's not the way it used to be. It used to be smooth, flat. And what was it covered in?
Limestone.
Gold.
Gold.
Oh, wow. Just guess.
Gold. How about that for beauty? How about that for aesthetic? How about that for wealth? Why do we think that our technology of architecture is so great now? It's a reasonable claim. Everybody has their taste, their flavor. I like this, I like that, that's okay. But in terms of just stepping back and looking at it, we have no reason to believe that we are so much more technologically advanced in architecture than they were back then.
It's more functional, isn't it? So it would be quite uncomfortable to live in a pyramid because it's
But there is a theory that the pyramid wasn't a tomb, they were a nuclear
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard
Made
about
by
that.
extraterrestrial life, I heard about it.
Yeah. In the research that I've been doing, there's heaps of that
I
stuff,
think it's nuclear.
but I'm trying to stay away from the more. It may be true, it may not be true. What do we really know? We don't know if aliens came. What do we know? But I'm just staying away from that because it's not something that we can show as hard science. But what we can show as hard science is the actual architecture that's left. In Bolivia, there is one structure there that has one piece of stone that weighs, they guess, just by estimating, over 400 tons. We do not have a crane upon the earth that can lift that weight. Yet they lifted it, and they fitted it into place. Exactly. It's very interesting. And it's many thousands of years old.
Where is it?
Manpower. I mean, if you have enough men, you can lift them
Come
up.
on, Andrea, it's okay.
They were very healthy back then.
They had
so
really
it's
tough
amazing.
guys.
Yes.
No, woofers.
Maybe. I think they lifted it 25 feet, and again, it's all got these cuts and grooves and everything, and they
Where was
fitted
this?
it, Bolivia,
Bolivia?
fitted it exactly into place. Exactly. It's very amazing. And there's so many examples like that, so many, all over the earth. And they're all set up astrologically according to the season. You can tell what day the solstice is when the sun comes past this point and hits that mirror and blah, blah, blah. All this stuff. They're not fools. They're very intelligent, very civilized, very capable, very high technology people. Their technology may have been different from ours. Like they like these kind of pyramid shapes and these stone buildings. But that's an aesthetic thing. We can prefer things like this, which will break down very soon. And some of them are made of poisonous materials and we destroy the earth while we do it. Or we can say, well, actually I prefer the stone kind of. That's aesthetic. That's a value system judgment. But in terms of the technology, it is not that the architecture of the ancient world. Look at the Pantheon. Look at that thing. It doesn't even have straight lines. It's one of the great wonders of the world, and it's all got curved lines everywhere. The greatest sculpture and art all over the place, everywhere on it. The Pantheon is, anyway, it's a building that... I got 6 missed calls from Enrica. Somebody remind me to call her back in 15 minutes when this is over. It is not that these people are, hairy, spear-chucking, hunter-gathering, close-minded, foolish people. It is simply not the case. Simply not the case. We can see from the architecture.
They weren't the ones who built it. Maybe it was someone from another planet.
Maybe, but whoever it was, they were sharp. There's other things as well. We're going to run out of time. There's a type of vase that they found, these giant, vase or vase, in some of the pyramids, in some of the ruins in Egypt. You cannot fit your pinky through the top, and they're huge. Some of them are as big as this room, and they hold water and grain and such. And they're made out of one piece. And they cannot understand how they did that. You could do it in halves and then join it together with a seam or something like this. But today, we do not have the technology to build these. They're very beautiful, they're very aesthetic, they're very functional, they've lasted thousands of years. It's just a vase, but it shows. A vase is a style of, kind of art or furniture or whatever, artisanship, like making a chair or a table or whatever else. But they're doing something thousands of years ago which we can't do now. And they did tests trying to understand how they hollowed out the inside and made this little thing. And they looked at it under a microscope. And the closest thing that they could understand to, like if you drill something, say wood, and then you look at it under a microscope, you can see that, this was done with a such and such drill. You can see there's symptoms there. So the closest thing that they have today is a type of sonar drill, a type of drill that uses sound vibration. I don't know exactly what that is, but this is what these scientists were telling. And it looks like somehow or other they were using something similar. Whatever they were using, we can't do it today. And there's many other things like that. I'll skip to the end. There's when anthropologists, historians look at a particular culture or civilization, there is one element of the culture or the civilization or the people which stands above all the others as the most telling indicator of the type of people that they were. Like we were talking about architecture, but it's possible, say like in the yogis or the Tibetan sort of people of South Asia, that you have very highly intellectual people who lived in a cave or under a tree. So architecture cannot always tell you. But there is one thing that can tell you, and one thing which they count above all others as the most scientific indicator of a culture. What do you think that is?
Writing.
Language. Either oral or writing. Language and writing and like that. Therefore, you had an understanding of this in Western culture also. I think I already mentioned that. Up until the Industrial Revolution, if you wanted to be a king, a queen, a duke, an earl, a duchess, you wanted to be a teacher in a school or in a university, a professor, you wanted to be a priest, you wanted to be a bishop, you wanted to be anything like that, you know, somebody in prestige in society. What did you have to do? You had to learn Greek, Latin, German, French, English. You had to study the classics. This was the fundamental basis of education in the Western world up until new money, up until the French Revolution, then into the Industrial Revolution a bit later. In that time it changed. And now we don't have to learn that at all. People consider technical knowledge to be superior. You get paid more if you're a plumber than you do if you're a professor in many cases, or a philosopher. But it didn't used to be like that. I'll get one of these in a second. Consider this. When the Sanskrit language first started coming in to Western culture, which was basically when the East India Trading Company went and took over India. Does anybody know that a private company ran India for several decades and pillaged it to the max? Did you know that? Eventually they killed so many people and stole so much that the English crown actually came and took over because they were just making a mess of it. I think one year they created a famine in Bangladesh where 2 million people died or something like that, something crazy. Like half the population of your country dies. It's like, that's not good management. So, Sir William Jones, he was the governor of the East India Trading Company. And when the white people, you know, colonialists, it's colonial times, got into India, they found something which they hadn't found before. They found a very highly evolved language. So then naturally they're scholars, they're scientists, they're intellectuals, they're writers, they're literary men like that and women. They studied it and they learned it. And then William Jones, one of the first, he made this announcement at a Asiatic Society meeting. He said, the Sanskrit language is more eloquent, more elegant, and more sophisticated even than Greek and Latin. And then he went on and on about that. Now, that little recital that he gave of that thing just blew up the whole academic, scholarly, literary world of Europe. Why is that? Because what he said was, there is an ancient culture, not Western, they're related to us. That means Indians, these dark-skinned people, and you've got to take yourself back now to a very white imperialist time. These brown-skinned people are, number one, in our family tree, because you've got Sanskrit is related to Greek, is related to Latin, is related to the Germanic languages. Actually, Sanskrit is related to every language in Europe other than Basque and Finnish. So that means in our family tree, it's not good. In our family tree, the Indians and the Europeans come together. And you may have heard of this, the Indo-European problem or the Indo-European situation. Therefore, and not only that, but Sanskrit is more elegant, according to this Dr. William Jones, more elegant, more sophisticated, more advanced than Latin and Greek. So the people who we look to as the pinnacle of wisdom, of philosophy, Socrates, Pythagoras, the works of Homer and Hesiod, Aristotle, these great, minds of the past which we look to. Even now, Aristotle is considered the father of modern logic in the Western world. Their language is not as sophisticated as this language. And language is the most telling component. If you are a stupid person, you cannot speak in a sophisticated way in anything. I had a girlfriend who, she became my fiancée a couple of years ago. Her name was Sophie. Her father was a physicist, and they came over to visit us. And I was talking with him, and I have my dad is a PhD, and I was actually going to do a Bachelor of Physics at Sydney University, but I dropped out at the last minute. But I've always had like a lay person's interest in those kind of subjects. And I read, like I was just reading a book called Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science, and like a lay person, it's like a hobby of mine. And he was actually a professor, an actual physicist professionally over his life. And he was, almost 50. And so we were discussing. And it was clear that despite me being able to bring in some things which he couldn't bring in, some spiritual subjects and some other things, he was superior to me. And he understood more than me. He'd studied more than me. Now, if we brought some person who was illiterate or had no knowledge of what the quantum field is, or what the nature of the particle and wave situation is of an electron, you don't even know this stuff. You've never learned this stuff. As soon as they come in, they simply are out of the conversation. They can't talk about that. A intelligent person can act like a stupid person, but a stupid person cannot pretend to know a whole field of knowledge that they don't know. It becomes like, I can't fix a car, I don't know anything about cars. And if somebody says, hey, fix this car, talk to me about cars, the carburetor this, the spark plug this, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And it becomes obvious very fast. I just don't know anything about that. So like that, when you have a whole language and all these literatures written by so many people, and the information and the words, they have such subtle, insightful, penetrating meaning about particular subject, in this case, yoga, medicine, war, governance, all these different things. That cannot be a person who doesn't know anything about that, from a civilization who doesn't know anything about that. It must be from a civilization where those things are known and understood. Language reveals so much. Now we have, hand me one of these Gitas. We have people like Emerson, like Thoreau. You may not know these people. Thoreau and Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau. These are people from the 19th century, 1800s. They were environmentalists. Emerson especially was an environmentalist. He was recommending to the world to go back to a simpler way of life, a more natural way of life, a more organic way of life, to be more in touch with nature, that it's a higher standard of living. Don't live in a city with 1 million people and eat the smog and the bad water and plastic food. You can do it, but you won't be as happy. He would advocate like that. He was an anti-slaver person. He was, what do you call it? Abolitionist in the United States. He was a poet. He was a literary man. Spoke multiple languages. He was famous in his day. He said, "This is as these writings are coming in. In the morning, I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmogonal knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita, philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, by which our modern world and its literature seem puny and trivial." Now this is a value judgment. This is an opinion of a man. Doesn't mean we have to believe that. But this is a great intellectual of last century, that as this literature, this very old literature, and I am, as anybody who knows me, I am not a sectarian person. You can take literature from anywhere on the earth, like I have just been reading Plato's Republic again. I love this stuff. When you read their writings, it is not fools. is very broad-minded, very wonderful minds, very liberated minds, very gentle people. You read Plato's Republic and just look at Socrates. Look how gentle he is. Look how polite he is. Look how austere he is, just wandering, not at all attached to a house or this or that or wine or women or whatever. It's just peaceful and happy and gentle and kind. He's a gentleman, a philosopher. These people are very broad-minded. They can bring us up by connecting to them through reading. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson. I owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first of books. It was as if an empire spoke to us, nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us. And there's others here. But the idea is, this ancient world is full of brilliant people, wonderful cultures, great civilizations, and there's so much there. It's sitting a few feet from us. You can step into that world. You know, when you read a great book and you just kind of enter in and you can't put it down and you just sort of go there. You know, effectively your body is remaining, but intellectually with your heart, with your emotions, with your mind, with your intelligence, you enter into some other place, some other world. You step into India 5,100 years ago. Krishna is there, Arjuna is there, the great battle of Kurukshetra is going on. All this philosophy and poetry and literature and wonder and mystic powers and yoga, yoga in the old sense and the powerful sense. It's so edifying, it's so uplifting, it brings such happiness, such wisdom. And then you bring that back into your life today, have a better life. All right, that's it. We got 5 minutes left. Any questions?